You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back, everybody. Your host, Michael. On a Monday evening, we're continuing our series here on Our Lady of Fatima and the Secret of Fatima, third secret especially. And I'm bringing on, of course, Kevin Simmons to continue this series as he continues this webinar. Second with me here on the show, third overall, and I believe there's going to be 6 of them total. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and bring him here. He's sitting there waiting backstage. So Kevin Simmons coming up next. Hey, Kevin, welcome back to the show.
Hi, I'm great. I feel very good to be back with you. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're continuing here the videos and webinars on the Secret of Fatima. And of course, we're talking today about the errors of Russia, communism, stuff like that. And, you know, like we did last time, we're going to show a video, pre-recorded video that you did. And then we'll have Q&A. But was there any introductory comments that you wanted to make before I show the video?
Yeah, it was just kind of at this point, if people haven't seen the first 2 videos, in webinars, I strongly encourage it because this has like a snowball effect, all of these webinars that we're doing. And to really understand the impact, I'll use the favorite R&T word, nuance in everything. And to hopefully understand one thing better, you have to really see what comes before it. And we're starting to get into some real serious concepts from the 3rd webinar onward, a lot of the background stuff having been established. So I really want to encourage people, watch the first 2 before you really, I mean, you watch this one too, don't get me wrong, but like if you don't understand something, you might have to back up the horse here and watch the first 2. Then just by way of something to latch onto when we're during this particular webinar, I'm going to start getting into faith and its relevance within the Fatima message. The 3rd and the 4th webinar in particular really helped to set that stage. And then by the time we get to the 5th and then the last one, the 6th one, it really reaches the crescendo. And you really have to pay attention because a lot of this is very, very carefully worded, nuanced. And so I'm driving at stuff without being very specific. But I'm hoping maybe we can point some of the finer edges out after doing like Q&A or something that may come to my mind when the video is playing. And then lastly, I decided to do videos for the actual presentation webinar itself because it allows me to add some graphics and some visuals and some B-roll, that kind of stuff that really facilitates the message itself that's being the presentation and what's being said. So in case anybody's wondering, why don't we do it live? Well, that's why. It's to provide the viewers more opportunities to get the material better with all of the visuals and pictures and such.
All right, so let's go ahead and pull it up here. So let me know if y'all have any difficulty hearing or seeing it.
In the previous webinar, we began to reflect upon the text of the 3rd part of The Secret of Fatima, using tools provided for us in the Message of Fatima booklet. We pondered the reason for the martyrdom of the people described in the vision, as it was not provided by Sister Lucia within her text from 1944. In the present webinar, we shall continue the discussion on this reason by reflecting upon the errors of Russia as epitomized in communism. Sister Lucia called communism the, quote, greatest heresy to appear at any time in the world, and that it was carrying its errors to the ends of the earth, end quote. While not a heresy in the strict theological sense, communism is a system containing heretical notions. Those errors are deeply rooted within atheism and a concomitant spirit of revolution that attempts to bring about the worship of man and the cult of matter. Man and his world were thus placed at the center, resulting in the false deification of human beings and, by extension, the state itself. In short, it was, in the words of Jesus to Sister Lucia, an effort to, quote, destroy his reign in souls. He further stated that the rigors of his justice will fall severely on those who attempt this destruction. Such is the nature of atheism, along with the idolatry of materialism, the destruction of supernatural faith in the hearts and minds of men. The Church had to battle with different totalitarian regimes that sought, in one form or another, to be enemies of truth. There was National Socialism, Nazism in Germany, Italian and Spanish fascism, and, of course, Communism in Russia. Given the godlessness of these ideologies and/or regimes, steadfast Christians were going to suffer for the faith. Pope Pius XII, on June 2, 1945, just as World War II was ending, gave a particularly noteworthy allocution. The Holy Father spoke about the justice of God, the evils suffered under National Socialism, and the reparation made by Christians in expiation as follows, quote, the generous victims who, during 12 years since 1933 in Germany, have made to Christ and his Church the sacrifice of their own goods, their own freedom and their lives, raise their hands to God in expiatory oblation. May the just judge accept it in reparation of many crimes committed against humanity, not least as a result of the present and the future of his people, especially of the unhappy youth, and at last lower the arm of his exterminating angel. End quote. Pius's reference to an exterminating angel parallels the third part of The Secret, where there is an angel with a flaming sword thrice crying out for penance. The scourge of war was permitted by God in order to appease or make reparation to his divine justice, outraged by the crimes of men. In the vision of the third part of The Secret of Fatima, the splendor of Our Lady held back the wrath of the angel. Sister Lucia stated that Pius's consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart in 1942 would shorten the war. Is there a connection between his act and the imagery in the vision? It seems quite plausible to make such a connection. If the statements I have so far presented are accurate, did the events of World War II then fulfill the imagery of the third part of The Secret? Our Lady did not specify only one war would take place as a result of Russia spreading her errors. She specified that there would be wars, plural. The most cursory glance at 20th century history demonstrates its numerous wars. What then is the fulfillment of the third part of The Secret? Let us look a little more closely at this matter. In his address of May 13, 2000, Cardinal Altaviani stated that the third part's images, quote, synthesize and compress against a single background various facts which extend through time in an unspecified succession and duration, end quote. This observation is one of the tools provided in the Message of Fatima booklet. The images of the third part do not refer to one single event. It seems that the images are a representation of events transpiring over a period of time. The images, therefore, can have multiple points of convergence with different historical events. To discuss these multiple points, one must highlight different events and show their relation to the description of the vision. It is thus less than likely that the events depicted in the third part refer exclusively to World War II. To what else, then, can the events of the third part of The Secret refer? There is an especially significant reference from Sister Lucia in a letter she wrote that is gradually becoming more well known. This letter was written to Pope Pius XII and dated June 6, 1958. In this letter, Sister Lucia reveals the reason why the year, 1960, was associated with the third part of The Secret. For those who are not as familiar with the significance of this year, there was an expectation that the third part of The Secret was to be published in 1960. It did not happen, which led to much speculation as to the contents and the reasoning for the non-publication. Returning to the matter of the letter to Pius XII, this letter was important because it adds to what we know about Sister Lucia's reasoning. Cardinal Altaviani, the former prefect for the Holy Office, revealed in 1967 that he had spoken with her in 1955 about the 1960 stipulation. According to Altaviani, Sister Lucia stated that the reason was because the text within the envelope would appear more clear. From 1967 to 2013, Altaviani's revelation guided much of the discussions on this aspect of Fatima's history. In 2013, the revelation of Sister Lucia's letter to Pius XII provided deeper insights into her thinking. She wrote that it was because during the period of time of the 1960s, communism would reach its high point, o ponto maximo in Portuguese. Can we here make another point of convergence between the images of the third part of the secret with historical events? At the end of World War II, communism had time to spread its errors throughout the world and continue to threaten the church. How would the errors of communism manifest after the war, and how would they threaten the church? Cardinal Altaviani once wrote about the ill effects of war on faith and good morals. Pius XII seemed to be well aware of this devastation by war and, by extension, uprising and revolution. Let us again quote from his allocution of June 2, 1945. Quote, "And for this reason, the Church craved to end the impudence with which the family, home, and hearth in the years of the war were battered and profaned, impudence that cries out to heaven and is turned into one of the most serious dangers, not only for religion and morals, but also for orderly human coexistence. A lack that has above all created the multitudes of the disillusioned, deluded, desolates without hope, the ones who are about to swell the masses of revolution and disorder, hired by a tyranny no less despotic than the ones that they wanted to destroy." End quote. A clear threat to reestablishing good relations among men in Europe was communism. It was noted by Pope Pius XI in his 1937 encyclical Divini Redemptoris that communism had already developed methods to infiltrate various social and political structures. At the same time, the response of Catholics to the needs of their fellow men was important and necessary to Pius XI. Otherwise, a door was left open for communists to exploit the situation, swell their ranks, and further spread its errors. Such exploitation evidences a well-calculated plan. Pope Pius XII's concern in 1945, then, regarding the imminent dangers to society was prophetic, especially given the real-time communist occupation of the Iron Curtain countries. By way of summary, then, the picture painted thus far is as follows. The totalitarian regimes of fascism and communism were, in a real sense, the scourge of God and punishment for man's sin. Faithful Christians were needed to make expiation to God, that he might, in the imagery of Pius XII, stay the hand of his exterminating angel. This same imagery appeared in the third part of the Secret of Fatima, and we wondered about the vision having convergence not just with the events of World War II, but subsequent historical events. Having thus summarized, let us now resume our examination of the facts. What opportunities were created by the climate resulting from World War II in order to bring about a deeper penetration of communism, specifically its ideology, into the West? Philip Trower offers some compelling thoughts. Quote, "Then came the 6 years of World War II, which, by throwing groups of Catholics and Protestants together in Germany against Hitler, and groups of Catholics and Communists together in France against the Vichy regime and German occupying army, stimulated interest in Christian reunion and sympathy towards Marxism." End quote. Communism was advancing bit by bit. Its errors were being sown and finding fertile ground in the West, not by communism itself, but by many of its foundational principles inherent to socialism. Some new documentation written by Sister Lucia here offers us some excellent reflections. In a private note revealed by the Carmelites of Coimbra in their 2013 biography, Sister Lucia spoke about the imagery of the angel with the flaming sword in the third part of The Secret. She wrote that for the purpose of, quote, Moving the indifferent, giving light to the blind, and drawing unbelievers, the Lord waits to send his angel with the flaming sword to dispel the diabolical armies that invade the world. They blind men and destroy peace, the peace of the church, the peace of the nations, the peace of families and homes, the peace of conscience and souls. It lacks peace because it lacks faith, lacks penance, lacks public, collective prayer. End quote. To Sister Lucia, the angel with the flaming sword in the third part of The Secret is meant to dispel these diabolical armies invading the world. The action or purpose of these armies is to blind men and destroy peace. The lack of peace, Lucia specifies, is because of a lack of faith. Penance and collective prayer, she believes, will help to enlighten faith within the hearts and souls of men. Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen argued for much the same in his 1948 book, Communism and the Conscience of the West. Quote, "The revelation of Fatima is a reminder that we live in a moral universe, that evil is self-defeating, that good is self-preserving, that the basic troubles of the world are not in politics or economics, but in our hearts and our souls, and that spiritual regeneration is the condition of social amelioration. Soviet Russia is not the sole danger to the Western world. Rather, it is the despiritualization of the Western world to which Russia gave political form and social substance. World War II came, according to Our Lady of Fatima, because there was no amendment in the hearts and souls of men." End quote. Archbishop Sheen then issued some remarks that go straight to the heart of the problem within the Western world, politicizing what is a spiritual matter. He also wrote, quote, "The Western world is scandalized at the Soviet system, but this is basically because it sees its own individual atheism socialized and put into practice on almost a cosmic scale. As long as the Christian thinks that there are only two directions he can take, right or left, not only will he make no contribution to the world, but he will make the world worse by failing to recognize that additional to the horizontal plane of life, there is also the vertical, which leads to God, and where there are the two more important directions of inward and upward. Not by finding scapegoats, whether they be political parties or communism, will we escape the responsibility of bearing, as Christ did in Gethsemane, the burden of the world's guilt. The revelation of Fatima was a most poignant reminder to Christians that the so-called problem of Russia is the problem of Christians, that by prayer, penance, and reparation, and not by war, abuse, and attack, will Russia join the society of freedom-loving nations." End quote. The evils wrought by the armies discussed by Sister Lucia certainly affect cultural and social matters, but it is their relation to faith that interests us. What is that relation? We shall take up that question in next month's webinar and dive deeper into communism's advance within the Western world. Thank you all for your attention. I would like to now open the floor for any questions or comments that you may have.
All right, we are back. Now, want to see if there are any questions here. Let me pull them up.
I have to say, that subscribe button at the end, that took me a little while to organize on Photoshop.
What was that?
I was having trouble getting the red color because it was turning blue on me, and I'm like, what are you doing? And finally I figured it out. I was like, good.
That's funny. Let me look through here and see. Again, send them to @Reason and Theology. Scrolling through, here's one. So what does it mean that Russia is doing things like outlawing deviant marriages, but the West is becoming more deviant? Has the prophecy been fulfilled?
Well, Sister Lucia herself had said, she was asked, what will be the sign that the consecration was done? And mind you, the question of the consecration is different than the question of the third part of the Secret of Fatima. Related, but the question of the consecration is not necessarily my forte. All I can say is what Sister Lucia herself said and is reported to have said, and I'm leaving it at that. She was asked, what is the sign that the consecration took place and that it was accepted? She said 4 simple words: Look to the east. Almost like Gandalf. On the morning of the third day, look to the east. And then next thing you know, the Rohirrim come, and and the light shines, and they'll go down and kill all the orcs and whatnot. But who would have thought connecting Lord of the Rings with Fatima? Ta-da! So I say that if there are some positive things coming out of the East, I'm not surprised. For those that knew, that I was educated at Franciscan University of Steubenville, and I attended the semester abroad program in Gaming, Austria, back in the spring semester of 2002. Hard to believe it's been 19 years already. And I remember spending time with students that were from the Eastern, the old Iron Curtain countries. And it was just amazing seeing how faithful that they were, how they maintained the faith. It was just amazing, and so I've been very impressed with that. Very, very impressed. I just kind of noticed somebody wrote, Tolkien would be proud. Frederick Corte wrote it. Yeah, I'm a nerd. I even learned to speak some Elvish. So it was all the rage at Franciscan University at the time. As a matter of fact, I watched the first movie in Austria. And I remember my Greek and Latin teacher, Professor DeBelli, may she rest in peace. She after the movie was over, she was just like, she spoke with a British/Australian accent, and she was just like, she was like, they divested it of all the Catholic and Christian imagery. And I was like, what do you mean? And then I was like, oh, okay, now I'm starting to get it. The older I get, I can see that better. But why would that be an issue? Why would they, try to expunge that heritage? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, and I'm convinced that the advance of communism and or Marxism had a lot to do with that. I technically distinguish between communism and Marxism. Communism being more so the political beast, as it were, from 1917 onward. Marxism being like the Marxist ideology driving communism. But that's a technical distinction, but that distinction does kind of play out in how to understand properly the points that I make in the webinar.
Irap 10 asks, so are the heirs of Russia just socialized atheism?
Are the heirs of Russia socialized atheism?
Yes.
What do they mean by socialized? In the sense of socialism, or atheism that's become socially acceptable?
I would think the former, but there's nothing in context that would tell me either way.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I'll answer maybe generally. Maybe this will hit upon what you're saying, and maybe something pop up in the chat here. The heirs of Russia are they're more multifaceted. The basic idea is that atheism, but also materialism, which, if you study the documents from the reign of Pope Pius XII, Venerable Pope Pius XII, he was very, very serious about this, very, very serious. And materialism is that idea that there is no spiritual world, there's only this material world. That's a very basic definition. But of course, that goes with atheism, because if you don't believe in God, there is no such thing as spirit. So therefore, only this world. They are technically distinct, but very closely united. They're pretty much like this. And so as atheism and materialism was advancing as a part of those errors, this is where we get into questions of things like consumerism. And capitalism is particularly prone to this. And so when the Holy Fathers have warned us about the excesses of capitalism, this is kind of what forms that background. Is, for one thing, things like usury, that's more of a problem in capitalism than it would be under socialism or communism, dare I say, at least in a rudimentary sense. And so these kinds of errors are bound up in it. I tend to focus on more so the atheism and the materialism, because I think between those two, we see an awful lot of what's going on. But a third one we could add to that is revolution. I do get into this in one of the later Fatima webinars. I don't remember if it's the fourth or the fifth one, but Pope Paul the VI made a very interesting quote in connecting the errors of his time with those of modernism, the old heresy of modernism under different names or other names is how he puts it. So is it socialized atheism, the errors of Russia? Yes, but I wouldn't say that exhausts it. It's very, very multifaceted, but that is definitely a component, certainly, of it, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Grant Michael asks, how can we persevere and help the cause as we suffer under strange new ideologies?
What was the first part of that?
How can we persevere and help the cause as we suffer under strange new ideologies?
Visuals always work. You have to stay close to Our Lady. Pray the Rosary. I wear, I'm not going to be immodest. I'll just be, but I wear my scapular. I've had a scapular there's never been a day where I haven't had a scapular on me since about the mid-90s when I first started wearing one. I'm a convert, by the way. And we have to stay very, very close to Our Lady and the tabernacle, praying to our Lord and all of that, because when we study the science of God, remember, if atheism is underlying all of this, the only opposite to it is God and religion. So if we stay close to, I'll call it the philosophy of God, just to keep it simple, the logic of God, that's automatically an antidote to all of what's going on around us, even in this day and age. And so we have to stay close. We have to get holy, as they say, or die trying. There used to be shirts with that slogan on it. That's really all that's going to help us through right now. We have great people who have helped us. Like, I love reading Sheen, for instance, because he's such a bright light. He spoke so much truth in the midst of the errors of his time, but also even in the present. Some of those errors are still very much around today. So just by way of quick example, I remember I was watching one of his Life is Worth Living videos, and he starts talking about revolution and the people to look out for in these groups. And he lists 3 different levels of people: the hangers-on, the Minutemen. But he says he's like, everybody else is inconsequential, he argues. He says the ones you have to look out for are the ones with the megaphones. He says those are the ones to watch out for. Well, that's very true even in our day. Timeless principles. And we have to learn to do that. We have to learn to live ourselves by timeless principles. As Sheen said, if you don't have these principles, if you live by the spirit of an age, he says, you will be a widow in the next. And that video is on YouTube. You can see it. You can for yourself. And I apply that in terms of the liturgy, especially. There are a lot of people who are very upset right now with the Holy Father with his motu proprio, traditionis custodes, and I understand why people are upset, but at the same time, Belladonna was once asked during one of her congressional sessions something along the lines of, why aren't you doing certain things? And she said, because the newspapers, she said, are all about the salacious. She says, I'm about the science. I'm about the science of these things. And that's what she's more interested in. She doesn't give the salacious stuff to the papers and whatever else. She goes for the science behind it. People ask me, why wasn't I a priest? What happened to me in seminary? I'm not interested in giving salacious stories. I'm interested in going into the science behind it and what's going on. And so to kind of back this up now to the point, why are we suffering from such a dearth of liturgical stuff right now going on in the church? Why do people have such unedifying liturgical lives? I pray in Latin every day. I'm a Benedictine oblate. My Benedictine breviary is right here, right behind me. I pray it every day. And part of it is, going back to this, it's novelty. Pure, plain, and simple. And in the Catholic tradition, we have a knee-jerk reaction against novelty, but this is one of the errors that we are very much caught up in. And I'm going to say it: a lot of priests are caught up in it. They think that the latest program is going to help their youth teen disciples program or whatever, whatever they call it, And I'm sitting here and I'm like, you're actually impoverishing them. There's actually one organization that gets started recently by Kevin Rorty called Souls of the Christian Apostolate, SOCA for short, and he's looking to address these kinds of issues. And I think it's a very worthwhile apostolate, from far as I can tell. It looks like it's got some really good, solid spirituality, and that is what we're sorely lacking. It is the spirituality, and people just looking for the late great thing, the next best thing, the next program, be it Christ renews his parish, or I can't remember some of these other ones. Now, they have some good to them. I'm not saying that they're bad inherently or intuitively, not necessarily. But if we're making the faith out to be a program, as the folks over at Blimey Cow like to say, you're doing it wrong. But when we knee deep ourselves, like neck deep, eyeball deep ourselves into the great tradition of our faith and spirituality, we begin to see those depths. And I'm all about the depth. I don't like being superficial. I don't even like having small talk. I just, boom, let's go right into it. I've had to develop my small talk skills over time, actually. But this has one great problem, is this novelty. And it's just, it's shallow. It's shallow. All right, let's see how my people in the chat room, when I hear the word shallow, who thinks Lady Gaga, Bradley Cooper? We're part of the shallow. No, we're far from the shallows now. Something like that with the lyrics. But I never saw the movie, and I'm a terrible singer, so block your ears, everyone. That's part of it is novelty, and I think Sheen nailed it, which was, if you marry the spirit of an age, you will be a widow in the next. These things pass. This is one legit criticism of Vatican II that people can offer. It was very much wedded to the spirit of the age with some of the things that were going on, and some of the documents are dated in that respect. Now, that's not that I'm saying let's throw out the whole kit and caboodle, but what I am saying is they were dated, and we have to be careful of that and mindful of that spirit that they were written in, because it does help us to understand what the fathers meant. It might be a bit of a long-winded answer to that question, but hopefully it was valuable.
There's another one on here from Fundamentum Veritatis. I may have missed it, so sorry in advance. When do you think the period of peace was? What was the window of time?
That's the question of the consecration of Russia, and I'm not here to address that this evening. I'm sorry, I'm not getting into that. I don't mean to be rude.
Why does Our Lady so often use illiterate peasant children to pass on her message? Does it seem odd to you?
Seems odd to me. No, I don't think it's very odd at all. Very simple-minded. We tend to like to add things, like, it's like the telephone game. By the time we kind of add things, little children can be more receptive to God's grace. Donald Foley wrote about this, and I can't remember which book it was of his. It might have been his Bible, Apparitions of Bible. I can't remember, but he wrote a little bit about this, and he has a good reflection on it. Why would Our Lady choose simple people? Actually, I think it was his book on Medjugorje, now that I sit and think about it. And one of the fundamental points that he asks is, or that he poses, is that they're more receptive, and they can better, especially assisted by divine grace, they can better relay the message without adding their own spin, their own take to things. So, for instance, with Fatima, the children thought that Russia was either a lady or a donkey at some point. So they're just, we don't understand it, but we're going to say what we heard anyway. So there's a certain openness there to it, to these graces, that I think there's something to be said for that.
Does the conversion of Russia refer to people becoming religious in general, like Eastern Orthodoxy, or does it refer to them eventually returning to communion with Rome, the Catholic Church?
That's actually one of the most debated questions right now. in the early decades after the immediate impact of Fatima in 1917 onward, a lot of people believed that Russia would become Roman Catholic. But Sister Lucia herself is rumored to have said to the Duke of Braganza in Portugal, that the king there, and he relayed it to Father Josiah Trenham, that Sister Lucia was asked this question, and she was just like, no, it doesn't mean they're going to become Roman Catholic. And Father Trenham was like, I don't suppose you have that in writing that I can look at. It's a video on YouTube. You can look it up for yourself. But I don't think it means that they'll become Roman Catholic. I think it means that that they, like what Sister Lucia herself says, conversion means to change from one thing to another. And in this case, going from their atheistic, godless ways back to God. Now, of course, Russian Orthodoxy is the predominant religion in Russia. So that's going to be your knee-jerk, your go-to, if you will. And I don't mean that rudely. I'm just saying that's going to be the first thing that's going to come to people's minds culturally if they're going to go back to God after giving up atheism through communism. Now, it may refer to ultimately that as people are rediscovering the riches of their faith, that they may go deeper and may personally come into communion with Rome, but still remain like Russian Eastern Catholics. Maybe it meant something along those lines. I don't know. But again, and I'm not getting to the question of the consecration specifically, but insofar as what it means with what does it mean with the conversion and all that, I think that there's something to be said on this particular level. I don't think it specifically means they'll become the whole country of Russia will suddenly become Roman Catholic. It never was Roman Catholic in the first place. I think they had their own tradition, liturgical tradition of the East in Russia. I don't think they were Latin Catholics all in Russia. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think, Mr. Lofton, you probably know about that question better than I do.
But in communion with Rome.
Yeah, but in communion with Rome, yeah. Prior to the 11th century, yeah.
And they're asking, was the prophecy to indicate that they're going to be in communion with Rome?
It could very well be. But in the sense of like they all become Roman Catholic, I probably not, no. And gradually people are working towards this. Rome wasn't built in a day, and Russia's errors had spread. And it's much more convoluted now than what it was in 1929 when Our Lady requested the consecration be done. Again, I'm not getting into that specific question, but it's much more convoluted now because these errors have spread all around the world, and they're very, very entrenched in the Western world right now. And Sheen predicted it. There's a video of him talking about this. I encourage people to read it or to watch it. He predicted this, and he actually said what would happen. He said, treat communism like it was manure. He says it'll spread all over the world. But he said the renewal will happen first in Russia. He says, and they will be the first to return to God. And the fires will be like a Pentecostal fires that are blazing upwards towards God. I think that's how he put it. And he said they will be the ones who will re-evangelize the rest of the world. I think that's what he said, if I remember correctly. So again, I think that there's, I take a lot of hope in reading Sheen on some of these things. This in particular, I think he's right because we see it happening all around us now. These errors have deeply entrenched themselves in the West. That fertile, communism has been spread like a manure, and I think we're dealing with it presently. I really do.
What does my immaculate heart will triumph mean, and how does it apply to our day and age?
That is also the question of the consecration of Russia done a little bit differently. I kind of see what's being done there. There are different schools of thought on what the Immaculate Heart triumphing means. And one school of thought is what happened in 1984 and 1985. There was going to be a nuclear war. Sister Lucia herself wrote about this. I think I talked about it in one of my previous webinars or in a question and answer. It's her book here. Yeah, that's right. Here it is. Como vejo a mensagem, How I See the Message. This is the Portuguese. I have the English behind me, but she was very clear in talking about what was going on at that time. She kind of generalizes, but she talks about how it was common knowledge that this was one of those more critical, mais críticos da história da humanidade, one of the more critical moments of human history, or of history of humanity, literally, in which the grandes potencias, the great powers, hostis entre si, hostile among themselves, projectavam, that they were getting ready, preparing themselves for, she says, para una guerra nuclear atómica, for a nuclear atomic war, que viría a destruir el mundo. That, forgive my pronunciation, it's bad, but that would have destroyed the world, if not entirely, in a major part, na maya parte, el que eficace, con que posibilidades de sobrevivencia, and what possibilities would there have been to survive? She's what she's arguing. And if anybody's interested in the Portuguese edition, that's page 54. I'll hold up the screen so everybody can see. Again, my pronunciation of Portuguese is notoriously bad, but the English translation is I just gave is off the top of my head is fairly decent. So she's saying that these great powers were going to go into a nuclear war, and so the 1984 consecration, according to one theory, in a way was one of the theories that this was like that Our Lady triumphed over this because it didn't happen, and how devastating would that have been? So again, that's one theory. I don't know. Again, I'm not a scholar on this particular end of Fatima. All I can show people is what people are talking about, and let people make up their own minds. I find that particular one to be very intriguing myself, but again, I haven't studied it at great length. And Sister Lucia was rumored to have said in the early 90s that this war would have taken place in 1985. That was with a gentleman named Carlos Evaristo, who is still alive. He's about 50 years old now, getting there. He's still alive. He lives in Portugal. And he had 2 interviews with her, and he published them in a book. Duas entrevistas, está da or com Irma Lucia, with Sister Lucia. And she says it. And the book was backed by Monsignor José Geraldes Freire, who was one of the heavy hitters of Fatima scholars. So he's no slouch. So yeah, I mean, it's just one way of looking at it. I'm not making any judgments either which way. And again, I really don't want to get into questions of the consecration of Russia because it's not my forte in this matter.
Grant Michael asks, so if we avoided a nuclear war, according to Sister Lucia, then are we living on borrowed time?
Why would it be borrowed time if we avoided a nuclear war? If it was we avoided the nuclear war, it's almost like the expression near miss. George Carlin had a really funny skit about that. He's like, near miss. He's like, it's a near hit. A collision is a near miss, he says. Boom, look, they nearly missed, Yes, but not quite, he says. So what's the point in saying this joke? It's because I don't think it's borrowed time. We avoided it. Human history went down a different path. And so we don't have to worry about that. I wouldn't say it's borrowed time. That doesn't strike me as having the ring of truth to it. No.
Okay. The rest of the questions are unrelated to tonight's topics. So if y'all want, I'll go ahead and give y'all one last chance. Send them to @Reason in Theology. In the meantime, while we wait on that, did you have any maybe additional thoughts you wanted to add?
I think there's a lot. One person earlier, I asked them. I can't always pay attention to what's going on here in the chat, but one person had brought up about, I think it was education and Marxism or communism. I can't remember who it was that had brought it up, but I asked him to remind me about it in the chat. But that's very much a symptom of this. I'm getting ready to publish a blockbuster article that's going to cause some heads to explode. And there's one line in there that I talk about with respect to the American education system, and it's a head nod to many greater issues. But I want to tell people how to read it here, because it's connected to Fatima. That's right. Here it is. Marxism infiltrated many of the academic institutions. Yes, that is very, very true. That was one of the ways that this was designed to happen. American education system is so predicated upon high school to college that right now trade schools, they're really hurting for people. And these people that go to trade schools, they're making a lot of money, like a lot of money. I have a friend here close to where I live who's in one of these programs, and he has how many job offers, and only a few years into it, he'll be making six figures. You know, the companies are really hurting for trade skills. And I think that there's something to be said for a man's, in particular. I mean, no disrespect to women. It's just I tend to understand the male perspective a little bit better. I'm biased, shall we say. But there's something to be said about a man's development for getting his hands dirty, getting involved in a trade. But since we don't have this component built into our American education system anymore, it's going towards this. You have to have a college degree. Well, no, not necessarily. Not necessarily. As a matter of fact, it's almost looking more and more like a racketeering thing now, going to college, because you have these people go to these colleges and they're getting indoctrinated. There's no getting around it. They just are. It's a fact at this point. It's not conspiracy theory. This is fact. People are going to these schools and they're getting indoctrinated. And that is in part because of the infiltration of the American education system by these communistic ideas, Marxist ideas. And so people are valuing not truth anymore. They rather learn about tactics. And if I was talking to somebody today and they said this to me, and I said, I'm going to steal this. He said, that's, well, when you have no truth, that's all you're left with are the tactics. You know, that's why we see all of these things on the cultural scene, you know, both here in the United States and probably even abroad. But it is all connected. As this atheism has become pervasive, our society is becoming unmoored more and more from God. Without God at the base of your foundation of your society, what do you have holding it together? You know, these are the kind, going back to an earlier question with respect to the errors of Russia, as faith, the reign of God in souls, has been obliterated or being obfuscated. Jesus himself, like he said to Sister Lucia, as I presented earlier in the webinar, he says that the rigors of his justice will fall very severely upon those who do this. And he said that in the 30s. I can't even begin to imagine how outraged the justice of God and the majesty of God must be now. I don't even, if I had a window onto the divine justice and majesty at this point and how outraged it was, I would probably die. Because unsupported by divine grace, seeing that utter horror and terror would be enough to end anybody's life, unsupported by divine grace. Interesting take on things, and I know I kind of walk off into, you know, funny land on that one, but I'm going to say something, and I was going to, this does not apply to just the American education system. This does apply to seminaries. People are asking about this stuff. It does apply to seminaries too. Yes, it does. People want to know why they have unedifying liturgical lives. Look at what's going on in the seminaries. And I'll just leave it on that little mysterious note.
Fundamentum Veritatis has one more here. Kevin, from your study of Fatima, do you have any opinions? I'm sorry, it moved on me. But let's see. Trying to get back to it. You can probably see it there on your screen. It's too small for me.
I do.
Do you have an optimistic outlook of what's to come for the future. Will it get worse? Is communism only beginning to fill the can't read the rest there. Fill the what?
Yeah, is communism only beginning to fill the veins?
The veins.
Um,
Gotcha.
yeah, I think that I do have an optimistic outlook in the sense that I've seen I'm privy to a lot of the filth in the church. I've seen that darkness. I've looked into it. I've peered right into the depths of it, and here I am still a practicing Catholic. Um, I'm optimistic because we know who wins in the end. Evil has his day. Evil has its day, but God will have evil has its hour, but God will have its day. I think is how Sheen put it. Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic. But we are going to have to get ready because we're going to have to undergo a lot of suffering. This ain't over yet. The current malaise in which we find ourselves, it's going to get worse, I suspect. But be of good cheer. Like just before we had today's webinar, Mr. Lofton, you had a Monday musings with Mike, I think is how you how you build it. I was able to catch a good chunk of it, and I think that you put it very well. It's like people have to come to terms with some things. They just do. People have to come to terms. With certain things like politically, and also in terms of religion, But our job is to get holy or die trying. That is our job. And if we are being in communion with Christ, it's amazing what storms we can weather. It really, really is. And I know that there are good priests out there. I know that there are good bishops. And the priests need to know that they have the support of the laity. They need to know that. I think I talked about it once on one of your programs at on the previous show about in terms of a posse. Priests and bishops need to know that they have a posse. It's like we're living in an old Western, And I'm blatantly ripping this off from a priest who gave me this idea, put this idea in my head. So this is not original to me. It's I think for people to really understand these things, we need to bring back proper liturgy, proper reverence, to use that word. Latin certainly assists with that, I believe. I don't think it's exclusively that. I think elevated English is very, very good. Almighty and ever living God, who in thine ineffable wisdom, hath ordered all the seasons according to thy good and providence, as opposed to, dear God, you are big. Help us to be big like you. Amen. It's ridiculous. Let's put a little elevation here, Or as I said, actually, somebody pointed this out in one of the comments, and I'd like to take this opportunity to kind of do this in a previous webinar. I talked about the romance in the liturgy. This is a very, very good point. Very good point. Romance in the liturgy. Again, I can't claim credit for this. This is some of the deep thoughts from one of my former seminarian friends. Priests have to learn to be men first, and being a man comes with that being a lover. Of course, for men who are on the track towards the sacrament of matrimony, I think that's going to be a pretty obvious thing, so we'll just leave that alone. But for men who are on the track towards a celibate clergy, to be a celibate clergyman, this is still a component of their human person. That does not die in celibacy. It's elevated. Sun katabasis to anabasis. That's what's going on there. And so what does this mean? What the heck are you talking about, Kevin? You're going off the rails here. No, it's all connected, because a priest has to maintain that lover aspect. It's not going to be in the physical sense with a woman, no. But insofar as he is a priest, he is making Christ present on the altar. And so the rubrics, in a very real way, help the priest to know his bride, the church. and to know her expectations. Any married man in the chat room tonight, you know what I'm talking about. And it's very similar. We can make a parallel, and it's a beautiful thing. So when priests are being sloppy with the liturgy, I've actually seen stuff like this, like with the wavy hand. It just drives me bonkers. Or they get flashy and showy. It's like, well, that's nice, but ew, gross. I don't understand this. There's no language of love there. And that's what the rubrics help us to understand, is that language of love between the priest and the bride of Christ, making Christ present on the altar. It's a beautiful, beautiful thought. And would that more men in the seminaries were trained along these lines, because I think restoring this aspect of a man in seminary formation would help us to come out with better priests. Because if they love Christ and they love his bride, they're not going to want to offend. And that would take care of so many things if they just learn to develop this. It's high imagery here, and I don't mean to overload anybody, but we've lost this. We've lost that sense of the sacred. We've lost that sense of beauty and what it means to be lovers. Yeah, in part because some people are batting for the other team, as they say, and so they don't understand this. They don't understand that there's so much disconnect and dissonance, and that's what we're suffering from. We're suffering from an awful lot of that. And I am convinced that Our Lady warned us about these things. I'm convinced that it's there in say, but we have to pull it out, fisk it out little by little.
Go ahead and tell us what we have to look forward to with the next webinar.
The next one we're going to be going here. Let me just pull it up here real quick. We're going to be getting more into that advancement of the ideology of communism in the Western world and the agitation that it caused, but also using Sister Lucia's date of 1960 that was written on the outside of the envelope of the third part of the Secret of Fatima, that high point of communism. We're kind of using that as a guiding light, and we're going to be getting more into Vatican II and what was going on at that time. So we're going to be talking more about John the 23rd, Paul VI, the famous smoke of Satan comment. Wait till y'all see the graphics for that video. I actually nailed it. But the idea again is we're going to be going a little more deeper into that lack of faith and how it plays into understanding Vatican II. And it has a lot of import for a lot of people who believe that the so-called Fourth Secret of Fatima was a condemnation of Vatican II. In effect, what I'm going to be doing is I'm basically debunking that narrative and saying, no, in fact, that's not true, and here's why. But I'm doing it in an elevated fashion. I'm not turning this into a street fight. That's not what these webinars are about. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a preview of what to expect in next month.
Well, I look forward to it. Like you said, it'll be in a month. I don't think we hashed out a date yet, though. But we'll do so off the air, so y'all can look forward to that, and I'll post it pretty soon here on Reason and Theology, so you can see it in the upcoming streams. Whenever you go to the YouTube page, the home page there, kind of go down to the bottom, and you'll see upcoming streams. I'm going to be adding some new ones there here pretty shortly. So we'll do it again pretty soon. Kevin, as usual, great to have you on, and I really enjoyed it. I look forward to the next one.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. And if I may, I want to thank everybody for their prayers with the situation with my brother. So far, things seem to be coming together. We just got some good news about settling one major aspect of his affairs. So that was very good. So thank you all for your prayers, and please do continue to pray for him. Can I show a picture, actually? Would that be all right? Real quick?
Yeah.
This was his funeral card. I don't know if you can see it too well, but yeah, I think I have to use my autofocus feature, but I think you get the point. This is a picture of him in case anybody was wondering, So again, thank you all for your prayers. My family really does appreciate them.
Good. Yeah. And thank you again for coming on. And everybody also, thank y'all for watching, commenting. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as I always say, check us out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology. If you want to support us, you also get access to extra content there. All right. See y'all tomorrow. God bless.